Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In today's episode, we're talking about why an online polling platform just hired a seasoned journalist to serve as its executive editor. Advanced Publications is one of the largest media companies in the world. It owns dozens of newspapers, the Conde Nast magazine empire, and even Reddit. A few years ago, it launched the Alpha Group, a tech incubator that would launch small startups and try to grow them into thriving standalone businesses. One of those startups was called the Tylt, a platform that allows its users to participate in online opinion polls on a wide range of issues. The Tylt was successful enough that Alpha Group spun it off as its own company. Recently, the Tylt hired Selena Roberts, a seasoned journalist who's written for the New York Times and Sports Illustrated, to serve as its executive editor. I recently sat down with Roberts to learn about the site's editorial ambitions and whether online unscientific polls have any journalistic value. Let's jump right into it. Hey, Selena, thanks for joining us.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, Simon. Good to see you.
So you've been hired as executive editor for a platform called the Tylt. It's owned by Advanced Publications. Can you start by explaining what Advanced Publications is?
Advanced Publications is a huge organization, obviously, that started in Staten Island with the Advance and certainly grew over the decades to become really one of the biggest forces in media. If you look under the Advanced Publications umbrella, you'll find legacy media companies like Conde Nast with all those wonderful titles under Conde Nast. You'll even find an ownership of Reddit as well. So it's vast. It also oversees and owns Advanced Local, which is kind of where we're located. When you look at the digital brands, all the newspapers that falls under that brand, when you look at cleveland.com in Oregon and throughout the country. So you can see where, a small newspaper in Staten Island really grew to be, quite a media empire.
So it owns like a bunch of newspapers. It also owns, like you said, Condé Nast. So the New Yorker, Vogue, Vanity Fair, all those major magazines. So this is a very large kind of media conglomerate company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got the premier titles. It's done such an amazing job too of really pivoting with the times and going into digital and sort of all the innovation and the areas that they really have made inroads in. And we're kind of part of that. We're on the incubator side. We're in sort of the area where they are trying to press some new buttons and work with new technology. And, that's where we fall. We fall into that area of sort of the new technology and really getting into the fascinating area of data journalism. A lot of people are talking about data these days and what do you do with it and how do you use it in journalism. And I think, the Tylt has found some pretty interesting ways to measure sentiment and to really find out where the passion is around topics and subjects with what we do.
And you mentioned this tech incubator. I actually had David Cohn on a few months ago, and he kind of runs this incubator. Can you talk kind of briefly about what this incubator is and how it kind of works within within the company?
Yeah, we're part of we were originally developed by the Alpha Group, right, which serves as sort of like that in-house, tech area, this media incubator. It's all under, Advanced Local. But that is sort of part of where that innovation comes from, testing, new technologies, developing new areas of expertise. I think that, what Advanced Publications, sort of the mothership, has done is to really create these areas where people can, put together really their tech hats on, put the ideas to press some buttons with journalism and do journalism a little bit differently. So we're part of that Alpha Group, and that's the development area that we're in.
Yeah, so like basically Advanced Publications was like, we're a big airliner, we can't pivot that fast. We don't know what the future of media is going to look like. So let's start this incubator that can launch all these little tiny startups that we can kind of, hopefully as you mentioned, Advanced Publications owns at least part of Reddit.
Mhm.
We want to launch the next Reddit basically through this incubator. Is that kind of summing up what their thinking was with launching it?
Yeah, I think that's a good summation too. I mean, the interesting thing is sort of being part of the alpha group and being have that startup vibe. I mean, it's really special to be part of advanced publications, but really have that startup sort of ethos that we work with here. We're not in one world trade where there are a lot of sort of the prestige publications, Vanity Fair, the New Yorker, all those publications. We are in our own little area over here in Chelsea, and it really does feel like a startup. I mean, it is a startup in so many ways because it's new technology applied to journalism. But it's kind of interesting because you get that energy. You get the energy that people are on sort of the cusp of something new. And so I think creatively, journalistically, it's a pretty special place to be.
And the Tilt was originally part of the Alpha Group as one of these startups, but then the idea that David was explaining to me is once one of these ideas is successful enough, then they kind of spin it out as its own kind of autonomous entity. That's what they did with the Tilt, right?
Yeah, I mean, we are our own sort of journalistic, editorially marketing. We have our own ad sales group, so we are operating autonomously. We are the sort of I guess in a sense you spin you out and see if you can make it on your own. And I think that's what we're doing right now is we're standing on our own as our own company, with our own identity and working to really create our own community within journalism and within media, but also with brands as well. So I think it's such a special place to be because 3 years into this, I think it's really defining itself in the marketplace. It's also defining itself with our users and with the people that come to us every day to get onto our social polling platform and tell us what we think, what they think. And what's so interesting about that is when we capture, all that sentiment through the debates that we put up. I mean, it's really voices telling us a story, right? So every vote that we get is a voice that's telling us a story. And I think it's kind of a really cool place and a special place to be where we get to reflect that back. We get to tell people, in return for giving us your vote and for giving us the sentiment around a topic, we're going to create stories that speak to that. So I think it really does empower the users that come to us on a daily basis.
Well, let's zoom in on that. So, like,
Mhm.
what does the Tilt actually do? You mentioned it's a social polling platform. What does that mean?
Sure. I mean, when you come to one of our debate questions, and we start everything by asking a question, it can be on culture, it can be on entertainment, it can be on politics. Very often, it's reflecting what the energy of the day is on the internet. Not all the time, but very often, it's about what's happening today. Is today, are we talking about something that a new record that Cardi B dropped, or are we talking about immigration? I mean, it could be any of those things, right? And then we ask a question about it. We want to know, what does our audience think? Just recently that we had an interesting polling question on politics and the discussion of electability. So we ask our audience, does electability matter to you? And what we found in return is about 57, 58% of the people said no, it doesn't. So you can imagine how that kind of platform, when you start every day with a question, you're receiving sort of the input. And what we try to do with every article that we post, we start it with a question. We have the polling apparatus there where you can touch and tell us how you feel, but you can also read contextually both sides of the story. We give a little bit on this side, we give a little bit on that side, so that if you're looking for more information about a topic, you can read. You can go through the multimedia that we put into every article. And then at the very end of the day, you can find out how people are voting by touching. We give you automatically real-time polling, which really is the only place on the internet you can find that, where you have real-time polling telling you where sort of you're sitting in this place. You're sitting in the zeitgeist of what's going on the internet. So I think it's a pretty interesting way to think about users giving, opting in to tell you what they think, and receiving all that information and all the data that we get back. And we send these, the debates out in a variety of ways, right? So you can vote on our site. We have any clients, any branded clients that we have, we can send that out via our beacon widget across the web. You can also find these debates on social media. So in so many ways, there's so many ways to vote and so many ways that we can capture that vote. And with all that capture, we get sentiment. We get what people really feel about these topics. And certainly our core group is the Gen Z millennials. So you can imagine how many great stories we can tell from that data, but also how a brand could also feel value from that data as well.
And let's give a concrete example. So, like at the top of the homepage right now, the question is: should everyone go to therapy? So you open up that link, and there's like this poll at the top, and you can either say basically yes, and everybody should go to therapy, or no, it's not something that's for everyone. And it's you do it through kind of the answers through hashtags, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then you have, it seems like an article that, so it gives people additional information so that it can help them have a more informed decision, right? So there's like an editorial layer to it. So there's like there's the case, rounding up information about why therapy for everyone would be a good thing, but then there's another part, showing sources that might argue that therapy isn't for everyone. Is that kind of how you structure it? So there's multiple parts at both the bottom and the top where I can actually vote in this poll. So I'm learning information, and then I'm also, there's like an interactive part to it too, where I'm actually voting on the answer, and then it gives me a breakdown. Right now it's 50% have voted that therapy is for everyone, and 50% have voted that it's not for everyone. So you can actually see the outcome in real time.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, right? Because you're basically being, given as a user the yin and yang of every argument in a sense. The ones that I think have, and I think we, editorially decide that these are arguments that you can give both sides. You can give context to both sides. We don't ask questions where you could not present two sides. We don't get into the weeds of like conspiracies and things like that. We get into sort of what culture is, what politics are. We get into issues and those kind of things. And you're absolutely right, Simon. You go in and you're able to read sort of both contextually around both sides of the argument. And you're able to, either use that to inform the vote that you're going to get, or sometimes people already know how they're going to vote before they get in. So in real time, you can see where you sort of stand with people. But over time, as we leave these polls up, you'll see that opinion does sort of evolve. More people come in, we get more data points from folks that come in, and you can see over time with our graphics that vote can kind of wiggle and change, and that people come in and add one side or the other. So over time, you can see how these votes evolve and where they come from around the country, and what kind of people are voting. So I think that in so many ways it gives you an idea of what people believe and think and the sentiment, and you can look at the 18 to 34 age group and where they are. I think that it's an invaluable tool journalistically, because if we're trying to find out what's the next story we want to pursue, or the next video we want to do for one of our channels, we have that sentiment coming in, and it can kind of guide us. You can imagine how valuable that would be for brands as well. But when we look at what we are taking in, and how we want to reflect that in a story, an example of that could be in politics, where we had questions about, Gen Z and millennials desperately want to vote, but they're not sure who to vote for, because at one time there seemed to be about 500 Democrats running, right? So we had a program designed to really get into that question, and we did it in a very fun way, which was a scripted show called Election Connection, in which we did a dating game around all the Democratic candidates, and we put in having a lot of fun with it, but also putting in the facts, also putting it above each candidate what they stood for in their platform. And we had somebody select a winner at the end of each dating game show. So we tried to have some levity with it, but we also try to tell a really good story with it, with the information that we're receiving from users. And as a journalist for so many years, the special part of that is, and you know this too, Simon, you get in a room with journalists at maybe a page one meeting or a daily meeting, and people kind of just come up with story ideas, and sometimes they're really good story ideas, and sometimes they're sort of just based on a hunch. The good thing about what we do is we don't have to act on hunches, right? We act on information, and we do that editorially. We do that for brands. We can tell stories that are important and relevant without a lot of guesswork because we know what people are
Is
telling
there
us.
like an app, or is this mainly just operate on the open web?
Yeah, on the open web. Certainly the voting modules are, they operate within social media too. They will take you right to the voting module. If you found this on Twitter or if you found it on Facebook, it would take you right to the page where you can vote, but you wouldn't lose your app ability. You would
Hmm.
go right back into that app.
Okay, so
But
you're
we
not
don't
trying
have
to
an app
drive like
ourselves now.
downloads. So you mentioned, so let's back up a little
Right.
bit and kind of, so like, I think why I was
Yeah.
interested in this interview is because you are coming in with this title, executive editor. You've got this background in journalism. So I'm trying to, it seems like they're trying to take this tech product and, really go hard on like a journalistic, adding a journalistic layer on it. Let's just talk briefly about your background in journalism. Like, you
Mhm.
were a writer at both the New York Times and Sports Illustrated for quite some time, right?
That's correct. I mean, I was there sort of right before the digital world descended on print, and in that transition time where there was a lot of things that were good that happened, and a lot of things and a lot of mistakes that were happening. I think that I was there in print during a time when they were trying to figure out what are we with digital, and I was there in the early days where the first reaction was to give away stuff for free on the web when that came along, and obviously that was a mistake because once you get away free, it was very hard for many years to pull that back in. So I was there for the pre-digital age, the digital age, and then sort of the transition into where we are now. And I think journalism's changed a lot. I mean, it's much more social journalism. I think that the folks that we hire here at the Tylt are very skilled at digital media. Many of them are digital natives. Many of them came upon journalism as digital only and don't know a different way. And it's really interesting to see how they use social media to reach out and talk to and engage with audiences, and then bring all that information back and inform their debates and what debates they're going to have that day. So it's been a great transition. I mean, I've enjoyed, sort of riding the best of print times, and certainly gone through the worst of it in print when there was a transition. But I think that the Tilt, along with some of the legacy titles too, are finding new ways in the digital space to create some great journalism.
And how did you end up working for the Tilt? Was this something where they approached you, or what was kind of the how did the conversations go about to where you came on?
It's interesting. I left Sports Illustrated in 2012 to start a streaming service for sports. It probably was a little early. It was back when most folks wanted everything to be ad based, and we wanted subscription based. So, we had amazing 2 or 3 years, and I think we decided that if we couldn't find sort of the right money to go with our idea, that it probably wasn't a great place for us to be. So we pivoted into a production company. I produced for about 5 years, several documentaries, feature films, and also have written for television pilots, etc. And I was pretty happy doing that for the last few years. And then but you're always thinking about, as a journalist, you're used to sort of like that daily sort of feel of what's going on in the world. And I think in filmmaking, you don't really get that anymore because projects are long term. You can work on a documentary for 2 years. So I did miss that. And a friend of mine just was listening to me miss it and said, there's kind of this interesting thing going on in data journalism, and you should really check it out. So I did, and we had some great conversations here at the Tilt with Kyle Lely, our general manager, and it seemed like a really good fit. One of the things that I talked to him about and that we want to do here at the Tilt is really take all that data that we get and the sentiment that we get and the emotion around the topics that we put out, and really turn it back into storytelling. So we're working on some bigger projects, longer term projects to really reflect that. Whether it's a long form story that's more magazine like, that really would take everything that we get from data, but put it into almost a multimedia magazine type story, to give people who give us so much something back. Like, what did it all mean to them? And contextualize it as well. We're also working, because all of the information that we receive and the sentiment we receive really is informative on an R&D level to brands, but also to filmmakers. So that's my background. So we're talking to production houses and filmmakers about using what we know about Gen Z millennials and turning it into storytelling form on sort of a bigger level, in whether it's a documentary or maybe a feature film as well. So those are the kind of conversations I've been having in the short 3 months that I've been here, along with sort of the daily thinking about like how we want to even just do an Instagram story. We had one of our reporters, Jesse Blazer, cover the climate march, and we wanted to make sure that we were reflecting again the information that our audience gives us through debates, but also be there live and to cover something live and to see how that sentiment really does play itself out in a big event like that. So we're doing a lot of different things. We're doing some stuff I think will be um, more toward the storytelling format going forward, whether that's something in a long form story or something that we do bigger with a production house, down the road.
I guess like I want to understand better. So you run a story, you have a poll in it. How is that poll then being used to enhance your coverage? Either you mentioned kind of using that to turn into another story, possibly a longer form piece. How would that
Mhm.
work in practice?
Well, think about climate change, right? And all the different questions that go around the subject of climate change. We can ask our audience, and again, mostly Gen Z millennials, we can ask our audience, about plastic straws. Do you want to ban plastic straws? And our audience will tell us 74% of them want to ban plastic straws. So as we think of a bigger picture story about climate change, or as we think of a documentary about climate change, that's one piece of information we have with us. Another one around climate change, may be, is it ethical to have children knowing what you know about climate change? Well, kind of a surprising answer, at least to me, was that 41% of those who responded to that question think it is unethical. That's a big number when you think historically about people wanting to have children. So, again, that's another really interesting piece of information we can put into a story about sentiment from Gen Z millennials around climate change. And maybe it is a magazine style piece, a multimedia magazine style piece, or maybe it is something that informs a documentary, or maybe it is a piece of information that a documentarian would like to have for their documentary. So, I think that there are multiple creative ways that we can, reflect what people are telling us, back to them by just asking questions, and maybe asking several questions over time. That question about children over time has changed over the last 3 years. They've been asking it here for 2 or 3 years, and you've seen that number rise to 41% from something in the 30s. So you can see how things change over time. You can see what kind of audience is saying that to you. And I think that is a better way of going after a story than just kind of a hunch or looking at some surveys and not really knowing what it all means. We know what it means every single day that we ask questions.
So just as like the Wall Street Journal will hire like a polling firm and will
Mhm.
poll on some issue or some candidate or something and then write a whole article about that, like that really dives deep into the results. You guys are
Mhm.
kind of creating a more scalable version of that that's pulling in results more quickly that you can then cite in stories, so that you're building kind of articles that are, informed by those polls and cite those polls, but then also have additional information, quotes, different stuff like that.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's sort of having your own in-house all the time, real-time polling center. I mean, It doesn't matter if it's about climate change or it's about, K-pop. It's sentiment. It's something. It's heat around a subject. And I think that that is super valuable, not just for us as journalistic storytellers, but also for brands too. I mean, imagine if you are a dating app, right? And you're looking for conversation starters for your first date. Well, we do that all the time, right? We ask conversation starters all the time. So you can imagine, working with, say, a dating app, and we are delivering, your 6 best conversation starters as voted on by, the people who vote with us. And so there's something fun we can do with it. There's something interesting and also informative. And you can imagine if we're asking questions for people on first dates, the kind of information you get from that. You know, we were having fun with one debate that we asked about. Would you go to Disney World on your honeymoon? I mean, so those are really interesting, fun questions that also give you a lot of insight as to what Gen Z and millennials are thinking about. Marriage. Is it at the same time that Gen Z and millennials may tell you they don't want to get on Facebook for love in a Facebook matchmaker app. At the same time, they'll tell you I would rather meet somebody in person, but they're also very old fashioned like that too, and they still want to throw bouquets at weddings, and we know that because we've asked that question. So you can get a sort of a myriad of responses that sort of add up to great storytelling for brands and great storytelling for our users as well.
Well, news sites have been embedding online polls on their websites and articles going back 15 years. Like, how does this
Mhm.
differ? Is it because the whole site is built around the polling, so you're kind of training your readership? Like, it's kind of the symbiotic relationship where it's not just a poll that's thrown in as an afterthought. It's actually more comprehensive. Like, how does this differ from what a lot of news sites have been doing for a long time?
So we contextualize our polls, right? So that's one way that it's not just a polling question. There's context around it, like we give the yin yang. We also put multimedia in. If we're talking about Taylor Swift, we put in a Taylor Swift playlist that you can hear. You can make your judgments based on all this information that we provide along with a poll. So it's not just a question, it's contextualized too. But we also sort of have a way to deliver it to it's not just if you're answering a Wall Street Journal poll and it's in the Wall Street Journal, and maybe they push it out on the social media platforms. We also do that as well, but we also use programmatic ad units. We also utilize all of our vast resources at Advanced Local. So we have ways to push that out through to so many other people and reach such a big scalable audience that we receive all this opinion in really this sort of easy organic way. And I think that in so many ways it's a better model for doing that, and it's what we do. So when you come to our platform, you may vote on one thing, but maybe you see another debate that you want to vote on. So you have sort of this hub where you can gain agency, and that's what voting is. It's about having agency, about letting your voice be heard, and I think that's what we do really well.
Well, a lot of these like online polls have been famously, uh, sometimes unreliable because advocates can flood the zone. Basically, one of the benefits of a Wall Street Journal poll is that they're hiring a professional polling firm that's doing a scientific poll. Are these polls scientific at all? And if not, how do they add journalistic value?
Well, we do use a patented signal algorithm. It sort of gathers all this opinion in real time, and it's a very effective way to measure engagement and exposure. It also, provides amplification and gathers more and more data. We have certainly ways that we can filter out things like bots, in our research and in our data. So it's a good way to measure. Like I said, it's more of a meter of sentiment. It's more of a heat around a subject. It's more passion around a subject. It's more sort of how do people feel over time on a subject, and sort of in that way, it's I think a better measure of how people are feeling about things. It's more a measure of hearts and minds than it is specifically like a Gallup poll.
And so you're trying. So it's not really scientific, but you're trying to like keep it's more around passion in some senses than saying like this is something that could be cited as like an official poll.
Yeah, we're not, this is not like Pew Research. It's more about, finding a way to gather that heat and sentiment, to gather that passion, to really do a measurement of hearts and minds around the things that we talk about every day, right? The things that are reflective on the internet, the cultural issues that we face every day, entertainment issues every day, political issues every day. And what we try to do over time is measure that sentiment. And again, reflect it back and try to find what's the story from that, right? What are people trying to tell us from all of this input that they're giving us on a daily basis? And that is incredibly valuable. You've been in those newsrooms, I've been in those newsrooms where you're trying to figure out what are people saying, right? And you can look at a poll, but you know that very often these polls are conducted with, landline phones. So this is a different way of gathering information. And the way that we see it is this information is so valuable to us. It's telling such a deeper, more meaningful story than just a Gallup poll, that we feel like it's a better way to do journalism because we can reflect a more accurate story back to people.
Well, is part of it like less about the data output and more about just making it more fun to read the content? Like you're kind of gamifying it and give it by adding a level of engagement might make it more engaging than the average article that might be on the New York Times or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a good point. It's something about, finding a way for people to intake information, gamify that, because remember, as we're contextualizing these debates and we're given the yin and yang, we're drilling down into the facts around both sides, right? So in a sense, it's a more interesting way to read an article. There's a gamification to that article. And then I think that there is also, again, that agency you get from voting on something, that actually somebody somewhere is finding your vote interesting to them. And I think it gives the audience more credit for how they feel. And I know that for years working in, whether it was the New York Times or Sports Illustrated, I don't know that I ever felt a part of an article. I don't know if I ever felt a part of agency of reading an article and then putting it away. I think in many ways, what we do is we capture that sentiment and passion around, an article, but then they maybe go ask their friends about that debate question. It's something you can kind of carry with you in your pockets a little bit easier than maybe a dense article that had some charts and graphs, but it's not something that stuck with you because you weren't actively participating in it. And I think that's where we have a big differentiator in the marketplace.
What kind of team do you have on the editorial side? Like what kind of talent do you have at your disposal?
One of the things that when I walked in here to talk to Kyle about, what they were doing here, I met some team members and I was amazed at their talent. And what I mean by that is that they are able to do so many things multimedia, so many things social media, so many things with their articles, to embed memes, to create with Photoshop really interesting graphics for their stories, that they're so multidimensional as journalists, that's what blows me away, is how talented they are, how they're not only really great writers, but they're great creators. It takes a lot to create the multimedia assets for each story that they do. They're cutting their own videos, they are using Photoshop, they are creating memes, they are using all that technology along with socializing it on social media. They're very often responsible for that too. That to me, that's an incredible sort of new talent that is emerging in this business, is the journalists that are also creators as well. And I have a staff of about 16 to 17 folks on the editorial side, social media managers, social media producers, along with journalists and editors in each of our categories of entertainment, politics, sports, culture. So it's not the biggest team in media, but it's a really good, great, talented team that can do a lot of things with one story that always blow my mind.
You said 16 to 17?
Yeah, about that, including social media The social media managers are under me too. So we have a pretty good team when you look at all the different things that we can do with engagement. We have engagement strategists, along with, like I said, all the editors and also videographers that I work with on a daily basis, and the creators that we have, and on the data side as well, whether it's graphics, those kind of things. So it's a robust team of multimedia, to me, superstars.
And I noticed from reading some of the articles that it's mainly right now focused on curating outside content in terms of like writing the
Mhm.
articles. Are there plans to do like original reporting, hired and seasoned reporters, or is most of the original output going to just be coming from the polls?
Well, I think that what I kind of mentioned a little bit, maybe I can build on it a little bit more, is that we want to take some of this opinion data and sentiment that we have and turn it into long form, sort of multimedia magazine pieces. And I feel like the people here, the writers here, are incredibly talented and will do terrific jobs with that. So, for instance, say we want to work on something with climate change, and we're taking some of the sentiment around climate change, but we're also reporting it too. We're also building relationships in that world by attending, the protest on every Friday at the UN, by talking to the leadership of those groups. So we do that kind of reporting, and I think we're going to do more and more of that. I think that's something probably you'll see much more going into 2020, that will take ownership of what we find out, use that by going out and talking with people. Some of our brand new launches on YouTube are reflecting that now. We have one new show on YouTube called Tell Me Everything, and it was our editor at large, Jesse Blazer, going to an independent bookstore in Athens, Georgia, and talking to independent bookstore owner about what it's like to, in this day of digital, to be a bookstore owner and what that community is like. And the reason we did that story is because we were seeing a sea change in Gen Z and millennials and what they felt about books. Over time, we started seeing more of them talking about reading for pleasure, and more of them talking about favorite books. And when we would put debates up about books, they would, really trigger people's sentiment and emotion around their favorite books. And so we started to think about what we could do with some sort of storytelling device to reflect that. So we did a video called Tell Me Everything for YouTube, and we just put that up. And I think that what it's already shown is that despite the fact we haven't had a YouTube channel for very long, so many people have gravitated to that story already. So again, it's sort of telling the story of what our audience is sharing with us, and trying to be mindful of what we're hearing and reflecting that back, and in this case, a video.
And I know you're on the editorial side, but can you talk a little bit about like what the business model is for the Tilt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're seeing is that, we're a great place for branded content, right? So if you think about what we do and the debate structure and how it all starts, with a question, you can see where we would be this great place for branded content. And you can look on our site from time to time and see those branded content plays. We just did something with the NEA, on education, and a series of questions about education. We have been a driver in the past with some case studies that would revolve around sort of driving engagement, elevating event fan engagement. Um, those are the kind of things on the business side that we do on a daily basis. We can drive response. We can work with brands to measure customer sentiment. All those kind of things we do, on a weekly basis and daily basis with the brands that we work
So
with.
there's like a market research angle where a brand might want to test something. So they're getting a little bit
Mhm.
of brand advertising out of it, but they're also getting some meaningful data.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for customer sentiment, say I think there was an opportunity that we had a few months ago that we worked with a natural gas company to, that was looking for some sort of solutions over time, and they wanted to see what customer preferences were, on like natural gas. So we posted questions about investment in natural gas infrastructure, or maybe we should mix it with renewable energy. So, that kind of company who's looking for what are people feeling about a topic can certainly, work with us to track that sentiment over time, and and watch how people share it across the internet, and sort of looking at, in this sort of geo-targeted area, how people felt about it, and what people really wanted out of that question. So I think it's a super valuable tool for companies who want to measure sentiment, but it's also a valuable tool for direct response. We have worked with streaming services that were sort of looking for what people think about maybe the Super Bowl, um, and we can develop a bunch of questions surrounding that as well. So I think in a sense it was being able to create these custom campaigns that will revolve around a question for a brand. I think those are, again, it's entertaining, we're gamifying it, but we're also giving the brand's information about the questions that are being asked and the sentiment around those questions. So the branded part of it, the sponsored part of it, creating custom campaigns for the business side, all of that I think is a pretty good use of a very dynamic and one-of-a-kind platform.
Okay, Selena, well, those were all the questions I had. Where can people find you online?
We are at thetylt.com. So come see us on thetylt.com, also on all of our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find us there as well.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Content on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. See you next week.